I mean, it's also things like, if you get the Australian, they have this thing with it called Wish Magazine, which is kind of here. And there's an even better one, which Financial Times, every month, the weekend thing, has a magazine, which, if you've never seen this really exists. It's called How to Spend It. I mean, you know, it's just extraordinary. It's the Crown Casino. It's Las Vegas. If you were being really unkind, you might say Bris Vegas, which is unkind and untrue, but, you know, it's that sort of thing. It's also a woman called Joyce Vincent. At the opening page of my book, which I wrote, say, 2.5 years ago, I was talking about this woman called Joyce Vincent. She was 40 years old, and she was watching the TV one day in her flat with the heating on, and she died. And nobody found her for 2 years, and she had the TV on and the heating on. She had neighbours on both sides. And this is one of the sort of extraordinary consequences of the fact the more globalized and connected we get, the more isolated you can get. I mean, I don't know what the hell were her neighbours doing. I mean, presumably they were twittering each other or talking about something or other, but, you know, nobody found her for a very, very long time. And that's a very sort of Moorist world. And I think that's roughly where we've been for 10, maybe 15 years. And companies love Moorism, by the way. So do banks. It's all about acquiring more stuff, getting more loans, getting bigger debt, getting a bigger house, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, you know, if it was a shopping bag, I've recycled these slides from somewhere else in the spirit of the conference. So it's, you know, it's all about, it's bling, you know, it's well, I've said all that, you know what it's about. It's the David Jones Black Amex card, it's all of that kind of stuff. Just going back to the matrix, now, Smart Planet, which is top right, shopping trolley would look a bit like that. This is quite an optimistic world, I guess, where people think that science and technology will solve virtually every single problem we've got. Interestingly, IBM is now using the word smarter planet or something, which is quite interesting. And it is very much companies like this world as well. It's very sort of Apple and Nokia and Siemens and IBM and anything online and Wired magazine, and the Toyota Prius is in this world, and so on and so forth. People are fully aware of economic issues, particularly sustainability issues, but they're using technology to solve those problems. You're still living with very sort of unregulated free market forces. It's, you know, robotics, it's internet, it's nanotechnology, it's biotechnology. It's a world, interestingly, in relation to communities. I think this is a world where communities exist primarily online. I mean, communities have shifted. They used to be physical spaces, and they still are to some extent. You know, it was the village, it was the street, it was the town, etc. It is now still true, but it is also now somebody with a shared interest, and the physical location is becoming less important. But I see a problem with this. I think when communities primarily exist online, the communities are quite narrow. They are quite superficial, and they're actually ultimately quite unfulfilling. And most people haven't twigged this yet. I think we're beginning to see it. I mean, people are beginning to realize it's not about how many friends you've got online, it's the quality of those friends. It's not about numbers, it's about quality. And there are books beginning to be written about this sort of thing. I mean, books like How to Be Free by Tom Hodgkinson, which is all about living a simpler life. There's a very good book called Enough by John Nash. There's a book I saw last week called The Power of Less by Leo Babautia, I think is his name. Very much in this area of actually sort of relocalizing the importance of the physical, the importance of quality in relationships, and so on and so forth. So BP Beyond Petroleum is a sort of classic example. The CSIRO is kind of in this world a bit as well, and et cetera, et cetera. I now want to sort of take a little sort of trip to Personal Fortress, which is down the bottom left-hand side. So this is sort of deeply pessimistic, and people just think, you know, the world's, you know, absolutely screwed, coming to an end probably. There's nothing I or anyone else can do about it, so I'm just going to go to the IGA, buy lots of baked beans, and move to Hobart or something like that. Now, what has happened, I think, in this world is that certain events have combined to create a country or a community that is incredibly scared and frightened. So climate change is, you know, worse than we expected. The economy is a mess. There's polarization of wealth, so there's tremendous social unrest. So people are effectively turning their back on the outside world, and everything is localizing. Now, this is a world of tight economic protectionism, very tight regulation, quite parochial. It's kind of at the extreme, and you've got to bear in mind that these have moderate sides to it and extreme sides, and the further you go out there, the more extreme it gets. On the extreme end, you have oil at $300 a barrel and Mad Max 3 is going on. At a sort of more over this side, it's actually not too bad. I mean, it's a world where people actually look after each other. It's not the Joyce Vincent world. But the trouble is, particularly at the extreme end, it can tip over into something incredibly nasty. It can tip into nationalism, xenophobia, racism. People blame technology and immigration in particular for causing all of the problems. And just it's everything sort of closing things down. I mean, if you had that influenza pandemic being absolutely true, and say instead of 1,700 people or whatever it is dying, it was 170 million, that comes true in a flash. And we could tip over into that world incredibly quickly. So that's kind of, you know, it's all about, I mean, Dick Smith is a great brand on the one sense, but it can be seen as quite sort of protectionist and nationalistic. You know, in this world, he'd probably set up the Dick Smith Diggers Bank, and everything would be localized. And that's a great thing on one level. But I think it can be quite insular, and it's all about growing your own. And yeah, I say there's some really good sides to this, but some really bad sides as well. The final world, which is my favorite world, which is enoughism, top left. So relative amount of pessimism, although again, you've got to bear in mind that over here, people are actually relatively optimistic, but it gets worse over here. But generally speaking, you know, it's relatively pessimistic. The economy's not brilliant, the environment's not brilliant, and so on. It's kind of an anti-materialist view of the world. People are alarmed about the state of the planet and the economy and, you know, social equality and all of that kind of stuff, and they've decided to try and do something about it. So it's very much a world where people have had enough, and it's also a world where a lot of people have got enough. They think, I don't need a bigger house, I don't need 3 televisions and all of that kind of stuff. It's very community-driven. It's very ethically focused. It's about buying less stuff and looking after it, fixing things, mending things, swapping things. It's about switching things off. This is very fair trade, very earth hour. It's about trying to get a balance. It's about saying, you know what, I'm going to turn the BlackBerry off when I go on holiday, or I'm going to leave the office at 5:30. Very connected to downshifting, sea change, tree change, all of that kind of stuff. Family life is rediscovered and extended, whereas in, for example, Moorism, it's completely fragmented. Resource shortages will be quite extreme in some cases in this world. So that's going to localize, I think, manufacturing and consumption. It'll be back to where it was sort of 50 years ago. People are working more locally because they're seeking that balance. Transport has become much more of a group activity. It's not about sort of individually necessarily owning a car. You'd be sharing one, you'd be renting one, you'd be using public transport and so on. You know, Melbourne is actually beginning to look a bit like Copenhagen or Amsterdam. There's a lot of people cycling, there's a lot of people walking. The speed of life is actually a little bit slower. You know, people aren't throwing away mobile phones unless it's right in the extreme. They're just saying, I'm going to ration their use a little bit. I'm going to turn them off now and again. I'm going to unsubscribe from a few things. I'm going to unplug from a few things. You know, if this, I mean, Twitter, for example, is not very big in enoughism. It's huge in Smart Planet and it's fairly big in Moorism. Shopping in an office world is, you know, it's all of a sudden it's cool to spend as little as possible. The absolute antithesis of Moorism. Second hand is important. Swaps, garage sales, all of that kind of stuff. Purchasing is less impulsive. People think before they spend, and people get told no quite a bit. It's about making your own things at home. It's about home baking, home brewing, making your own fun. It's renting rather than buying. It's about swapping. You know, but people will barter in this world. Okay, so I guess the really big question is, and this isn't about picking a winner. You know, all 4 of these are currently true in Melbourne. I mean, if you could find a house with 4 people in, which could be a challenge, you will probably find 4 people in 4 rooms on 4 screens doing 4 different things at 5:30 at night. And, you know, this is celebrated by the likes of Big Pond and their Big Pond homes as though this is some kind of positive. I actually see that as a bit of a negative, actually. I think they should all possibly do a bit more together. So, you know, Dad might be in Smart Planet, Mum's in enoughism, the son's in Personal Fortress, and the daughter's in Moorism, or vice versa. And this could all be true equally in the future, but it's not about picking a winner. It's about trying to work out roughly where are we now. And as I say, I think we've been here for quite a long time. And where as a broad trend are we going? And I think we're sitting right there at the moment. These bleed into each other. That's why there's a dotted line. We're sitting on the fence here, trying to work out what's going to go, what's going to happen. And I think, I'm sorry to say this, but if you want a prediction, I think this recession is going to be short and sharp. It's over in 2 years. We're straight back here. I think we have no memory. You know, fear is replaced by greed, and we start the entire cycle again. Now, if it's a bit longer, say it's sort of really nasty and it's sort of 3-4 years of you know, very slow growth and all the rest of it, there is a chance we end up here. Although, you know, realistically, we'll get a mix. This will be blurry.